Radio Suffolk. It's 20 minutes to 9 o'clock. It is Easter Sunday, and what better way to welcome the day in than with a little bit of live music in the studio. I'm joined by George, Colin and George from the Suffolk Guild of Ringers, who have Norwich Surprise Minor. Fantastic. Thank you very much, George, Colin and George. And a little bit of echo there in the background. Ringing in Norwich Surprise in Minor for this Easter Sunday. And a fitting start to introduce my guest this morning, who started bell ringing when he was just 8 years old. This week he turns 80 and his passion for bells is as strong as ever. He's bell ringer and church historian George Pipe, and he'll be sharing his lifetime's collection of memorabilia in Felixstowe next weekend. Some 10,000 items will be on display. Thank you very much for coming in this morning, George. Just paint a picture of the collection then. 10,000 items. What have you got?
Well, first of all, happy Easter, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me in. Well, I started ringing, as you said, at 8 at the end of 1943. And the very first thing that my grandmother gave me was a postcard of Grunsborough Church, was where I learned to ring. And from then on, I've collected postcards, books, leaflets, pamphlets, cuttings from the newspapers, pictures and all that sort of thing. I inherited some of my father's collection. And ringers down the years have given me items, bequeathed them to me, and they've all been collected. And I thought it was just a lovely opportunity to share them with the general public as well as the Suffolk Guild of Ringers.
Because, I mean, on the face of it, it's memorabilia about bell ringing, but actually the bells are rung at every significant moment within church and the wider community's life, for weddings, for funerals, for in wartime, in peacetime. So actually what you've got there is a very kind of angled and specific social history of church life and community across Suffolk.
It is a social history, and it isn't just about bells. The exhibition will show quite a lot of books on churches and church architecture and all related subjects like that. and very much part of life and part of my life, and certainly part of the life of the community, because in a way, bells announce so many things. We ring them for holy baptism, confirmation, weddings, sadly for funerals, but also civic occasions. And I've had the privilege of being involved in all sorts of things like that, both here and in Australasia and in North America.
And you told me that your great-great-uncle rung a peal in 1870 for Waterloo.
1817.
1817?
Yes, for the Battle of Waterloo,
wow.
My great-great-uncle James.
And so his name is inscribed inside the tower?
Yes, he's on a peal board, as we call it, in St Mary's Tower, Belfry. I'd like to have met him.
I was going to say, well, with that kind of heritage, you probably had little choice but to embark on a careering, but to sustain it for all of those years. What is it about it which captivates you?
Well, it's very difficult to explain the enthusiasm. There have been 22 ringers in my family, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your children will follow you. But it so happens that it's been handed down, as it were, father to son. Several of my cousins rang, my great-uncles, my father's cousins, and now in the latest generation, my great-nephews who live in Cambridgeshire, they're ringing, and so the art continues, as we call it.
Where's the best place that you've rung? What's the most memorable set of bells?
That's a very, very difficult thing to say. Probably the most exciting experience was dedicating the new Ring of 10 at Washington Cathedral in 1964. I was privileged to be one of the 10 invited to the United States to do that, shortly after the death of J.F. Kennedy. If somebody pressed me and said, well, how many churches have you rung? Well, it's over 2,000. And where do you think is the finest ring you've ever? These things are always subjective, of course, but if I was asked to name one ring of bells that I think epitomises the beauty of bell founding and the sound of bells, it would be Lichfield Cathedral in Staffordshire.
Okay. And actually the experience is changing because lots of churches are having their bells renewed. It's quite an expensive and lengthy process. But when we were talking about Rattlesden Church, St Nicholas and Rattlesden just a moment ago, you said, oh, they've had a new yes. set there. And obviously we had Wolsey's bells restored here in Ipswich.
That's right.
And lots of communities, not necessarily just part of the church, but the wider community, value the sound of the bells.
Yes, and we're delighted. I mean, so many of the old arts and crafts are dying out, but certainly not ringing. We estimate there's about 40,000 ringers in the UK and probably another 500 abroad. But one of the things that I've tried to do at this exhibition is to provide something for everybody. So it'll be for young ringers, old ringers, bringing back memories and so on, artefacts that I've been given, and some of them quite curious. I mean, one of the old ringers at St Mary Tower that I rang with when I was a kid in short trousers was a snuff box maker. And I've got two of his snuff boxes, and that sort of thing, and they're fun to have. But of course, like everything else, you can't take these things with you. They're all on display next weekend, as you've said. And then several of the items will be given to various libraries abroad and in this country as well.
What do you think of our group of young ringers, George, Colin and George in the studio this morning?
Well, I'm not saying just because they're here, but they're three very, very promising, young ringers, very, very capable already. And that was a lovely piece of handbell ringing. I'm very pleased that the name George has been perpetuated because it was becoming a little unfashionable. But there was a very nice piece of ringing, and they are, of course, we tend to say the ringers of the future, but they're the ringers of today. And little Mason over there hopefully will follow in their footsteps. But it's certainly a joy for me at 80 to ring with young ringers like this.
Let me bring in Richard Munnings, again from the Suffolk Guild of Ringers. Richard, I remember when you taught Leslie Dolphin to ring the bells a couple of years ago. How is it in terms of the scene across Suffolk? Are people taking it up?
Well, yes, we actually have quite a positive seen at the moment. There's never enough ringers to ring all the bells, but that's always been the case because we're actually blessed with a lot of bells in Suffolk. But as you've seen, we've got a lot of young ringers. My little boy Mason, who's here, who's 8 years old, he's already had a go, and the future looks very promising.
And so it's your AGM next weekend, as well as the exhibition which is on at the Masonic Hall in Felixstowe. That's over the 11th and 12th. And how do you feel when you see the kind of history that George has amassed? 10,000 pieces of related memorabilia.
It's staggering. I've been very privileged actually to go around to George's a few times, and I've seen bits and pieces that he's got, but to see it all will be quite a sight, I'm sure. And we're always wary, that we're carrying on a great history that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come in and share some thoughts this morning, George. And we'll hold fire on some more bells. Let's just find out what's happening across the roads. First of all, it's 10 minutes to 9. This is BBC Radio Suffolk. It's just coming up to 9 o'clock this Easter Sunday morning. My thanks to Richard Munnings and to George Pipe. That exhibition is on next weekend, the 11th and 12th at the Masonic Hall in Felixstowe. Over 10,000 pieces of bell-ringing memorabilia and social history. I'm joined in the studio by George, Colin and George, some younger generation of bell ringers who have brought their handbells in, and they will give us a goodbye Norwich surprise in minor. Thank you, guys. Members of the Suffolk Guild of Ringers ending the programme this morning. James Hazel is on from 9 o'clock. Happy Easter.